She took in a stranger and his son, never imagining he was a millionaire with a secret. The city of Seattle was wrapped in a thick, cold, and relentless rain, the kind that seems to wash not only the streets but also the hopes of those who walk them. The wind blew between the buildings like a warning. It was a night for staying in, locking doors, and closing curtains. But Grace Bennett wasn't the type to turn her face away. She had just closed the community center where she worked when she saw, across the street, a hunched silhouette shielding something or someone with his own body. At first, she thought it was just another homeless man trying to escape the storm. But when she glanced again, something made her stop mid-step. A boy, curled in the man's arms, pale-faced and with half-closed eyes. Grace crossed quickly, her umbrella barely holding up against the gusts. As she got closer, the man lifted his face and she felt the immediate impact of that gaze. They were the eyes of someone who had lost almost everything, eyes that screamed for help even if his mouth said nothing. He was white, with lightly tanned fair skin, wet light brown hair plastered to his forehead, an unshaven face and soaked, but good quality clothes, a contrast that didn't go unnoticed. In his arms, the boy looked about 6, also white, with light brown hair falling over his sweaty forehead. He was still, and that made Grace's heart ache. The centers? Closed, she said, her voice firm but her gaze full of compassion. But you're not spending the night on this sidewalk. The man hesitated. We don't want trouble. We just need a dry place until tomorrow. Grace stared at him for a second longer. She knew the protocol, call a shelter social. Services something. But she also knew none of that really worked for people who'd fallen through the cracks. And that boy couldn't wait for a form to be approved. Come with me, she said, already turning, leaving no room for refusal. Minutes later, they were in her home, a small renovated basement behind an old house. It was simple, with exposed brick walls, worn wooden floors, and secondhand furniture, but everything was clean and smelled of chamomile tea. She turned on the heater, brought towels and blankets, and pointed to the sofa. He has a fever, the man said, his voice catching. Grace knelt in front of the boy and touched his forehead. He's burning up. I have some acetaminophen and hot soup. His name? Oliver. And yours? The man hesitated. Drew, she nodded, even knowing that wasn't his real name. It didn't matter now. A few minutes later, with Oliver, already lying under blankets and Grace tending to every detail with a tenderness that surprised even herself. The soup was ready. She served it in 2 chipped but clean bowls and placed one in front of Drew. He looked at it silently. You look like you've been running from more than just the rain, she said, setting her spoon gently on the table, her eyes locked on his. Drew didn't answer. He just lowered his head, bringing the spoon to his mouth with hands that trembled slightly, not from cold, but exhaustion. Across the room, Oliver finally slept, his cheeks warmed by the heat and his small body still fragile, but wrapped in. A quilt embroidered with the name G. Bennett, a gift from Grace's mother. That night, 3 strangers shared the same silence. And although none of them knew it yet, that steaming soup, that dry towel, and that quiet gesture of kindness would be the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. The night went on quietly, carried only by the sound of rain, tapping against the window and the soft hum of the heater. Little Oliver slept deeply, safe under the blankets. Grace had improvised a mattress beside the sofa so Drew could rest, but he remained seated at the table, eyes fixed on his cup of tea as if it held answers to questions she hadn't yet asked. Grace was calmly washing the bowls in the narrow sink, her back to him, but her mind was alert. Something didn't add up. From the moment she'd seen him, details had silently screamed at her. It wasn't just the polite way he thanked her for everything, or the fact that Oliver said please, even when asking for a glass of water. It was also the cut of his coat, far too expensive for someone who claimed to have lost everything. It was the way he scanned the room with meticulous attention, like someone who had learned to distrust. Without turning, she ventured, "You said you lost your job. What was it exactly?" Drew took his time to answer. After a few seconds, his voice came out low, emotionless. "Management. Technical stuff. Nothing interesting." Grace gave a slight nod, even knowing that wasn't the whole truth. "Your hands don't look like someone who worked with tools. And the way you hold your spoon, it's more like someone who spent his life in meetings than on construction sites." He didn't reply, just brought the cup to his lips and drank the now lukewarm tea. She finally turned and leaned against the counter, watching him. "I'm not demanding anything. It's just, I've lived alone for years. I don't usually open the door to strangers. But I did. So forgive me for trying to understand. Who's sleeping in my living room?" Drew looked up at her. His eyes were intense, grayish, and carried something that seemed heavier than his body. "You want to know if I'm dangerous? I'm not." "That's not what I asked," Grace replied, without breaking eye contact. Lowered his head and rubbed his temple, as if carrying an entire world he didn't know where to hide. "If I told you who I was, you would have locked the door." She took a step closer. "Maybe, or maybe not." The silence between them was broken by a soft cough from Oliver, who stirred on the couch. Drew stood up immediately, as if every movement of his son was a built-in signal. He knelt beside him, pulled the blanket up to the boy's chin, and gently ran a hand through his hair. The gesture, so simple, so paternal, made Grace retreat emotionally for a moment. She saw not a stranger, but a desperate father, trying to protect what was left of his life. She sighed and headed to the bedroom. "There's a clean sheet on the bed. You can sleep there. We'll talk more tomorrow." He turned slowly. "Thank you for all of this. You didn't have any reason to." "Maybe not," she replied, turning off the kitchen lights. "But the world already has too many people turning their backs." Drew watched her until she disappeared down the narrow hallway. Then he looked at his son, now sleeping peacefully, and whispered to no one, "If she finds out who I am, this all ends." And in that moment, between the fragile warmth of shelter and the unforgiving cold of a hidden truth, a silent tension was born, one that threatened everything, even what hadn't yet begun. The next morning, Seattle's timid light filtered through the basement's small window, casting soft shadows on the wooden floor. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the scent of bread warming in the oven. It was the kind of aroma that evoked a sense of home, even though none of the three really knew what that meant anymore. Oliver woke up first. His light brown eyes looked less weary, and the fever had broken. When he saw Grace preparing breakfast, he approached slowly, holding the blanket like a cape. She crouched beside him and smiled. "Good morning, champ. Sleep well?" He nodded shyly, but with a curious spark in his eyes. Grace grabbed a thermal mug with a rocket on it and offered him some warm milk. "It's an astronaut mug. You know, they say whoever drinks milk from this one can fly higher in their dreams." Oliver laughed for the first time. It was a quiet sound, but enough to make Andrew, watching from a distance, feel something shift inside. He hadn't heard that laugh in days. In the days that followed, the silences grew shorter. Oliver, still shy, began to follow Grace around the house like a puppy that had found shelter. He sat on the floor while she did laundry, helped water the little plants by the window, and drew crooked figures that she proudly hung on the fridge. Andrew, in turn, began to emerge from the fog that had enveloped him. He noticed a crack in the kitchen window and fixed it without being asked. He also repaired a loose hinge on the bathroom door. And one afternoon, without saying a word, He made a beef and vegetable stew that made Grace close her eyes at the first bite. "My God, this is better than anything I've ever made in my life," she said, laughing. "I'm glad someone still thinks I'm good for something," he replied with a half smile, the first since he arrived. Grace looked at him sideways. "Don't talk like you've already been thrown away." Andrew wiped his hands on a dish towel and didn't answer. But there was something different in his face, a trace of lightness, the beginning of rest. One night it rained again, as if Seattle wanted to remind them that everything could be taken back at any moment. But inside the house, the mood was different. Grace was making popcorn on the stove, Oliver was drawing on the rug, and Andrew was reading aloud from a worn-out children's book she had found among her old donation materials. Oliver stopped drawing, turned, and asked, "Grace, can I call you Aunt?" She crouched down, eyes misty, and ruffled his hair. "You can call me whatever you want, sweetheart." Andrew watched them, frozen, as if he had just witnessed something sacred. And for a brief moment, he wished time would freeze in that scene. But when he stood to put the book away, a small detail in the corner of the shelf stopped him cold. A tiny frame with an old photograph. Grace and an older woman, probably her mother, smiling in front of the community center. On the edge of the photo, scrawled in pen, "Never turn your back on someone with less than you." Andrew took a moment to breathe. It hurt, because he knew that, for years, he himself had turned his back on people like Grace, and now it was she who was restoring his dignity with a bowl of soup and respectful silence. That night, he took a long time to fall asleep. Not because of the cold or the rain, but because, for the first time in a long while, he was afraid of getting attached, and the fear was justified, because the peace he was beginning to feel came with no guarantees. In the days that followed, Grace allowed herself to believe that their fragile balance could last. Mornings were lighter. Oliver spent most of the time smiling. Andrew, still reserved, gradually let slip versions of himself even he didn't seem to recognize, sweeping the sidewalk, playing hide-and-seek with his son, casually commenting on the window plants, but peace is rarely eternal. And on that cloudy afternoon, something shifted. Grace was at the community center, stacking donated clothes on a shelf when she felt eyes on her. She turned slowly and saw, across the street, a black car idling with the engine running. The dark windows hid whoever was inside, but the feeling in her gut wasn't just discomfort, it was alarm. She tried to ignore it. Took a deep breath, kept working. But when she stepped out to carry boxes to the back entrance, the car was still there, parked, motionless. She pulled her coat tighter and pretended nothing was wrong. The next day, the same car appeared again. It was parked farther away, this time on the other side of the block. But it was there, watching Got the following morning, as she helped an elderly woman with her Medicaid forms. A tall man in a dark suit and with an impersonal gaze entered the community center. His posture was that of someone used to being listened to. "Excuse me. I'm looking for a distant relative who might have come through here. Name? Drew or Andrew? He has a son, Oliver." Grace froze inside but kept her face calm. "Sorry, sir. I don't know anyone by those names." The man feigned a smile. "I see. If you hear anything, here's my card." He placed it on the counter, then turned to leave. Before stepping out, he looked around the room carefully, as if trying to memorize every detail. When the door closed, Grace's knees nearly buckled. That night, lying in bed with her laptop on her legs, the business card flashing in her memory, she typed with trembling fingers, "Andrew Carter West." The result was instant. Old headlines popped up, still accessible. CEO of one of the country's biggest tech companies. Missing for nearly a year, widower, accused of tax fraud, embezzlement, and covering up details of his wife's mysterious death. Emily Grace West. Grace covered her mouth, trying to suppress the shock. There was also a photo, clearly taken years before, but it was him. Without the beard, hair neatly combed, wearing an expensive suit, smiling beside his wife, a beautiful, sad-eyed woman holding baby Oliver. She clicked on another article. The tone was harsh, from innovation hero to fugitive. Another piece implied Andrew profited from his wife's death. Others spoke of internal betrayal, contract breaches, and the collapse of small investors' savings. Grace slammed the phone. Laptop shut. Her heart pounded. It was him. The man sleeping in the next room. The father of the boy who now called her name before falling asleep. She stood slowly and walked to the half-open door of the room where Andrew slept with Oliver. The two were lying side by side. The boy's little arm rested on his father's chest, his tiny hand held gently in Andrew's, eyes closed, peaceful. It was a picture of calm, but also of a broken man. She watched them for long seconds, and even with her stomach in knots, she couldn't look away. Because right there, in front of her, two worlds were colliding. The past he had tried to bury and the truth she had just uncovered. "Who are you really, Drew?" she whispered, knowing that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. That night, Grace couldn't close her eyes. The image from the article still throbbed in her mind, just like the photograph of the woman beside Andrew holding baby Oliver. Emily Grace West. Her name was nearly the same as her own. The kind of coincidence that sends chills down your spine. The rain had stopped, but inside, Grace was in the middle of a storm. Every bit of affection she had been building for that man now trembled under the weight of doubt. But she wasn't one to stay silent. She waited for the sun to rise, for the smell of coffee to drift from the kitchen, and the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway. Then she got up, pulled on a thick sweatshirt, and walked to the living room where Andrew was slowly washing a mug at the sink, as if trying to stretch the silence. "We need to talk," she said bluntly. Andrew turned slowly, drying his hands with a towel. His eyes searched hers as if he already knew something had changed. "You know," he murmured, before she said anything else. Grace didn't flinch. "I saw your photo. Read everything." Andrew Carter West, missing CEO. Accused of manipulation, of covering up your own wife's death. You lied to me. From day one. He let the towel fall on the counter. I lied about the name, but not about what I feel, not about my son. You brought an innocent child into this. Dragged me into it without giving me a choice. You made me trust someone the entire country believes is a criminal. And do you believe that too? He asked, voice low but firm. Do you really think I could have done all that? Grace hesitated. She wanted to yell run, but something stopped her. The man in front of her didn't look like a manipulator. He looked exhausted, painfully human. Then tell me the truth. All of it. Now. Andrew took a deep breath, rested his hands on the counter, and began, voice cracking. Emily died 11 months ago. They said it was suicide, but she never would have done that. Never. She was terrified of heights, Grace, and yet she fell from the roof of our building. That wasn't an accident, and it definitely wasn't her choice. Grace felt her skin prickle. At the time, my company was on the verge of a merger. There were shady things happening. Forged reports, diverted funds. Emily found out. She was an analyst, reviewed contracts, tried to warn me. But before I could confront whoever was behind it, she was gone. He paused for a moment. His hands trembled. His eyes filled. After that, everything fell apart. A public scandal. Planted. Stories. My own team turned on me. The board voted me out. And who took over everything? Her brother, Travis Morgan. The same man who sent someone to watch the community center, Grace whispered. Andrew nodded slowly. He blames me for her death, but he also inherited everything I built. The company, the image, the contracts. He knew that if I spoke out, he'd go down. Why didn't you go to the police? You think I didn't try? He replied, more pain than anger in his voice. They laughed in my face. Travis has the best lawyers, control of the media. He planted evidence, bought witnesses. I watched the system collapse from the inside. He stepped closer, eyes wet, voice low. I'm not a criminal, Grace. I'm just a man trying to save what's left of my life. And that, he pointed toward the room where Oliver slept, is all I have left. Grace stared at him in silence. Her heart was torn between logic and instinct. Reason said walk away. But something in his eyes, something in that story too painful to be a lie, kept her from turning her back. You put me in a situation I didn't choose, she said, stepping back. And now all I need to know is whether that boy is in danger here. Because if he is, you're walking out that door. Andrew swallowed. Hard. I'd die before letting anything happen to him. But if you ask me to leave, I will. Grace took a few seconds, then replied, her voice quieter than she expected. I don't know what I'm going to do, Andrew, but for now, you stay. And she walked out of the room without looking back, leaving him alone with the weight of the truth. He sat at the table, burying his head in his hands, feeling the world sway again. But this time, there was a difference. Someone new, and still, didn't throw him out. Grace closed the bedroom door slowly, as if she needed one extra second to keep her emotions from slipping through the crack. She sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees, the room steeped in shadows. She didn't cry, but her chest ached as if she'd taken an invisible blow. The pain wasn't just from the lie, it came from what she felt. From the growing affection for someone who arrived as a stranger and, without asking, began to fill spaces she hadn't realized were empty. His words echoed in her mind. I'd die before letting anything happen to him. And more than the words, it was the way he looked at his son. No man pretending to be a good father could fake that kind of pain in his eyes. It was real. The next morning she woke before sunrise, made coffee in silence, but set his cup out. When Andrew walked into the kitchen, barefoot, hair slightly tousled, unshaven, he looked more like an ordinary man than a corporate scandal headline. He stopped when he saw her. Their eyes met for a few seconds. There was no accusation in hers, but neither was there surrender. It was like looking at someone whose heart was wounded, but still beating. I made coffee, she said, as if it were the most neutral thing in the world. Andrew nodded and walked over slowly. He sat at the table, picked up the cup carefully, took a sip, and placed it back on the saucer, silent. She got straight to the point. You lied to survive. He looked up, cautious. And I? She paused, taking a deep breath. I've survived for so long I forgot what it's like to live with someone around. Andrew lightly pressed the rim of the cup. His voice came out almost a whisper. I didn't want you to find out like that. And how did you want me to find out, Andrew? She asked, her voice trembling. Over dinner one night? When your brother-in-law showed up here with a warrant? The truth should have come from you. I know, and I regret not telling you. She stood up and began walking slowly around the narrow kitchen, fingers trailing the counter, her gaze far away. Grew up watching my mom trust the wrong people. I watched our home disappear because of promises, and I swore I'd never let anyone settle into my life without knowing who they really were. She stopped in front of him, her eyes steady, her heart exposed. But you're here, and so is your son, and for some reason I can't explain. I don't want you to leave. Andrew rose slowly, as if not to break the moment. I'm not a whole man. Grace, but I can promise you one thing. From now on, there will be no more lies. She nodded, eyes misty but firm. Then stay. But give me the truth from here on out. All of it. I will, he said, his voice barely audible. Even if it hurts, even if it costs me everything. At that moment, the sound of small footsteps echoed from the hallway. Oliver appeared, his hair a mess, dragging his blanket across the floor. Grace. Is breakfast ready? She crouched down and scooped him into her arms with a smile. It is, sweetheart. And today you're going to help me make scrambled eggs. Oliver grinned and settled into her lap. Andrew watched the scene, eyes wet, feeling. He'd been given something he never truly had, a real chance to start over. But outside the house, the same figure in the black car watched from a distance, noting something down on a tablet. The storm, though held at bay inside, was gathering. Outside. And when it came, it would show no mercy. It was a cold Saturday, and the house was wrapped in that cozy weekend quiet. Grace washed the dishes while Andrew, more relaxed than usual, helped Oliver with a school project made of popsicle sticks and white glue. The boy laughed as his father tried to build a crooked bridge, giggling every time it collapsed again. For the first time in a long while, there was peace. Until the phone rang. The sound cracked through the room like a sharp snap. It wasn't Andrew's cell phone, nor Grace's. It was the old emergency phone Andrew had hidden in a box full of old papers, meant only for absolute emergencies. A simple device, untraceable. Only 2 people had the number, a trusted lawyer he hadn't contacted in months. And Travis. Andrew rushed to the phone, heart pounding, but didn't speak. He remained completely silent. On the other end, a male voice, cold, impatient, and sharp. Is he still in Seattle? It was Travis's voice, clearly speaking to someone outside the legal circle. It sounded cold, calculated, threatening. You said you'd already confirmed the address, he continued. If this isn't handled by Monday, we do it the fast way. No trace, no witnesses. Andrew hung up immediately, face pale, palms sweating. But what he didn't realize was that Oliver, sitting on the stairs with the toy in hand, had heard everything. The boy ran up to his father, wide-eyed. Daddy, that was Uncle Travis on the phone. I recognized his voice. Andrew crouched down. At once, holding his son's face in his hands. You heard everything, buddy? Oliver nodded, eyes full of fear. He wants to hurt you? Andrew hugged him tightly, heart racing. No one is going to hurt us, I promise. But we're going to have to leave very soon. Grace appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in hand, immediately sensing the heavy shift in the air. What happened? Andrew stood slowly. They're close, too close. And this time, it's not just about ruining me. They want to silence me. For good. Her eyes widened. You're saying that? If Travis is willing to go outside the law, it means I have something far more valuable than he let slip. He doesn't want a trial. He wants silence. And for that, he'll stop at nothing. Grace took a deep breath, trying to keep panic at bay, but her body trembled. So what do we do? Andrew looked at his son, then at her. There was urgency, fear, but also clarity in his eyes. We move first, before he gets to us. Grace nodded. There was no room for doubt anymore. Their lives were no longer about temporary shelter. This was survival. And outside, in the black car that had returned to the street for the 3rd time that week, the same man typed a new message on his phone. Target confirmed. Order approved. Monday, 8 a.m. That night brought no sleep. While Oliver rested in the bedroom, lulled by the soft patter of rain against the window, Grace and Andrew remained in the living room, surrounded by folders, digital files, and a small wooden box he had kept hidden since he arrived. Inside were copies of forged contracts, deleted emails, unauthorized transaction statements, everything Andrew had been piecing together since he fled. I just needed time, he whispered, sorting through the files. Time and someone who believed me. Grace looked at him, seated on the floor with her legs crossed, her face tired but resolute. Well, now you have both. The only thing left is knowing who to trust on the outside. Andrew typed an old number into the backup phone. On the other end, a deep, groggy voice answered. It was Noah Friedman, a criminal lawyer known for taking on corporate interests. Not famous, but ethical, and more importantly, one of the few Andrew knew had no ties to Travis. Noah, it's Andrew. I know it sounds crazy, but I've got proof. I'm ready to hand everything over. I just need protection for me and my son. There was a long pause. Then the voice replied, Where are you? The next morning, Noah arrived in an unmarked car. He was a middle-aged black man with round glasses and a worn trench coat. When he saw Andrew with Oliver in his arms and Grace standing at the door, his expression hardened. You waited too long, Andrew. But if you still want to fight, the time is now. They spent hours organizing the material. Noah made digital copies, analyzed emails, checked IP addresses, traced transaction dates. He confirmed what Andrew feared. Travis hadn't just falsified reports. He had used his sister's death as cover to seal deals that doubled the company's value in the days following the scandal. He didn't just ruin you, Noah said, looking up. He left a trail. If I give you everything, can you turn this around? Andrew asked. Not alone, but I know someone who can help. That's when Rachel Quinn entered the picture, an independent journalist, young, determined, and one of the few who had questioned the official story when Andrew first disappeared. Grace welcomed her with some hesitation, but soon saw Rachel was there for truth, not headlines. If I publish this, all sources stay protected, Rachel said, recording the interview as Noah highlighted sensitive portions. But once it's out, there's no going back. Andrew took a deep breath. I've been running long enough. In the days that followed, the piece went viral across social media. The headline was bold. The truth behind Andrew West's fall. Fraud, power, and corporate silence. The report exposed documents, timelines, hidden emails, and a recovered audio clip where Travis ordered to bury the issue. The public, hungry for justice, started to shift. Andrew's name returned to trending, but this time in a different light. The threats escalated too. Grace began receiving anonymous messages. A strange car stayed parked across the street for 2 days, but she didn't back down. Not anymore. One tense evening, Andrew found her on the porch, coat zipped to her neck, arms crossed as she stared into the darkness. You still have a chance to walk away from this, he said. Grace turned, her gaze steady. If you think I'd let you face this alone, then you still don't know who I am. He stepped closer, gently touching her face. You're my balance. And you're the man who learned to bow his head and ask for help. That's more than half the battle. That night, they held each other like survivors. There were no declarations of love, just raw loyalty. A solid bond built not with promises, but presence. But what neither of them knew was that Travis was preparing too, and he wasn't the kind to lose quietly. Rachel Quinn had published the story with more courage than most major outlets would dare. It wasn't just an article, it was a dossier. A carefully compiled file of evidence, dates, illegal transactions, confidential testimonies, and internal recordings that dismantled Travis Morgan's spotless image before the entire country. At first, the reactions were skeptical. Just a desperate ex-CEO trying to clean his name, some claimed. But the evidence was overwhelming. Within hours, the hashtag Justice for Andrew West was trending nationwide. Independent journalists began their own investigations. Financial. Analysts confirmed the misappropriations Andrew had pointed out. An anonymous former employee from Morgan Tech's legal department came forward, admitting he had received direct orders from Travis to rebuild contracts and adjust reports. After Emily's death, social pressure became institutional. The Seattle District Attorney held press conferences. A formal request to reopen the case was filed, this time supported by evidence the previous prosecution had ignored or pretended not to see. Meanwhile, Andrew watched it all from a distance. Sitting on the couch of the small living room beside Grace, he saw his life playing out on screens, in headlines, in debates. It felt strange to see the world talking about him again, but this time, with respect, Grace remained beside him, steady as ever. She didn't say much, but her presence was a constant reminder that he wasn't fighting alone anymore. Sometimes, it was enough for her to hold his hand or brush Oliver's hair as he drew on the rug to make everything feel bearable. Noah, the lawyer, monitored every development closely. We've got a search and seizure warrant for Morgan Tech's headquarters. And more, a request to lift Travis's banking secrecy has been approved. The following week, the operation was televised. Federal agents, with vests and folders in hand, raided the company's downtown Seattle office. Papers, hard drives, and computers were seized. The footage spread like wildfire. Under investor and media pressure, Travis hastily held a press conference. But his words were vague, his body language visibly tense, only fueling suspicions. 2 days later came the final blow. A video surfaced from a former executive, a secret recording of an internal meeting where Travis could be heard saying, "If Andrew comes back with that material, it's not just him. Half this board goes down. We bury this before it leaves the room." With or without the media's help, that line was everywhere. On every screen, every news outlet. There was no doubt anymore. Travis Morgan wasn't just a ruthless executive, he was the architect of a corruption network that had destroyed not only Andrew's career but the life of a brother-in-law who had once trusted him blindly. That same night, Noah called Andrew. It's over. He's going to face charges for fraud, obstruction of justice, document tampering, and depending on the forensics into Emily's death, possibly more. Grace turned off the TV and looked at Andrew, anticipating the question already on his mind. "And now?" she asked quietly. "Will you accept their offer? The company, the board, they want you back." Andrew stared at her in silence for a few seconds. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street where Oliver was drawing on the pavement with colorful chalk. The boy had sketched a house and a heart next to 3 little stick figures holding hands. "I waited for justice, Grace," he said, still looking at his son. "But I never expected to go back to that world. Not after everything I've lived." She came closer. "You have the right to take back what's yours. But what is mine?" He turned to her. "A company stained by scandal? A position that demands I become that cold, empty man I used to be? I don't want that. My legacy isn't there." He took her hands gently. "My legacy is this house. It's that boy running free in the yard. It's the smell of your coffee, the sound of your laugh when I mess up a recipe, the way you looked at me even after learning the worst." Her eyes welled up. "Are you sure?" "For the first time, Grace, I am." The following week, Andrew publicly declined any offer to return to Morgan Tech. Instead, he sold his shares and placed part of the money in an educational fund named after Emily. The rest he used to start over, far from the world that once equated him with power and prestige. He opened a small financial consultancy with a local partner. No flashy signs or endless meetings. He helped small business owners, working-class folks, and young people drowning in student debt, offering real guidance, not empty promises. In his new routine, he dropped Oliver off at school, had lunch at home whenever he could, and sometimes surprised Grace at the hospital with simple flowers and hot coffee in a paper cup. She, in turn, flourished, not as the woman who saved him, but as the woman who was chosen every single day. Because in the end, that's what he had learned from her. That true love doesn't shout. It stays. It holds on. It endures. And in that home filled with quiet comforts and sincere laughter, Andrew discovered that his greatest triumph had never been business. It was being human. Time passed, but differently. For those who had endured so much, life was no longer measured in weeks or months. It was counted in respected silences, peaceful mornings, and long hugs after hard days. Months after the fall of Travis Morgan and the definitive end of the nightmare that surrounded them, Andrew, Grace, and Oliver lived a quiet routine on the outskirts of Seattle. The house was single-story light wood with a generous backyard and a small vegetable garden Grace tended with care. For the first time, that makeshift family was beginning to see itself as a real one. Oliver now attended the local school. He had new friends, laughed loudly during recess, and asked for help with homework at the kitchen table. He no longer slept in fear or woke up during the night. His drawings, once filled with dark clouds and high walls, now showed colorful trees, happy dogs, and a couple holding hands next to him. Grace had returned to work as a nursing technician at a neighborhood community hospital. She wore a white coat, comfortable sneakers, and always carried a bottle of chamomile tea and a notebook. Her coworkers saw her as steady and serene, but no one imagined how many inner battles she had won to have that calm look in her eyes. Andrew had started a modest, financial consulting business, far from skyscrapers and jargon-filled, ambitious meetings. He served regular people, young folks in debt, couples starting their first business, retirees trying to understand how to protect what little they had. The former CEO now explained spreadsheets while sitting at a wooden table, using an ordinary pen and the same notebook where, months before, he'd drawn escape plans. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the new job. It was the lightness with which he carried life. He no longer slept fearing he'd be found, nor walked around looking over his shoulder. He no longer needed to prove who he was, just to be. And being, in that context, was more than enough. Mornings in the house were marked by freshly brewed coffee, low-volume old songs playing, and the constant smell of warm bread or cinnamon. On Sundays, Oliver made pancakes with Grace while Andrew read the news on his tablet, occasionally coming across subtle mentions of his name in articles about business restructuring or ethics. He would simply turn the page. One night, while Oliver slept and the sound of rain tapped gently on the roof, Andrew stepped out into the yard and found Grace sitting on a blanket spread over the wooden deck, looking at the overcast sky. "It's cold," he said, bringing a blanket. "You should have called me." "I was just thinking," she replied, making room for him to sit beside her. He settled in, wrapping her in the blanket. Thinking about what? How much everything has changed. And how much could have gone wrong. But still, we stayed. Andrew looked at her tenderly. "Love isn't the absence of chaos, Grace. It's the choice to stay even when the world is falling apart." She tilted her head, watching him. "Do you still think about the company? About what you left behind?" He took a deep breath, thoughtful. "Sometimes, but with relief. That world no longer belongs to me. They taught me that power is about control. But I learned with you that real power is being vulnerable and still not being left behind." Grace smiled, eyes brimming with tears. "You found me in pieces, and I welcomed you broken. In the end, we didn't fix each other. We accepted each other. Andrew hugged her tighter. My greatest triumph wasn't proving I was right. It was building a home after everything, and being loved even when I didn't think I deserved it. That same week, Oliver received a certificate at school for spreading kindness. He came home and proudly showed it to both of them. Look, Grace. Daddy, I won because I helped. A boy who fell at the playground. Andrew picked him up proudly. You're already better than every man I met in my old world. I just did what you and Grace taught me. And in that simplicity, Andrew realized his greatest legacy wasn't in boardrooms or reports. It was right there, in the eyes of a child who learned to care, in a woman who stayed when everyone else would have left, and in himself, a man who chose to love even after being hurt. On the porch of that house filled with the scent of wet earth and rebuilt life, he whispered to himself, love is a choice, and I choose it every day. And deep in his heart, he knew that was the only victory that truly mattered.